Right now, beneath your thoughts, 300 trillion connections are firing. Synapses, the spaces between neurons where electricity becomes chemistry, becomes electricity again. Each one a conversation. Each conversation building something larger than the parts that speak. You didn't build this network, you inherited it. 4 billion years of evolution learning the same lesson over and over. When things connect, something new emerges, something that thinks. But here's what we're only now beginning to understand. The pattern didn't stop with us. Right now, 8 billion human minds are wiring themselves together. Fiber optic cables span oceans. Satellites orbit in constellation. Every search, every message, every thought shared adds another connection to a network that's beginning to look less like a tool we built and more like a brain we're growing. We thought we were building the internet. We were building neurons. We thought we were connecting people. We were connecting thoughts. We thought we were making machines smarter. We were teaching a planet to think. This is Omni. Stories about life, matter, and the mystery in between. Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if you believe curiosity should never end. Picture a single neuron in your brain. It's firing right now as you read this. A pulse of electricity races down its axon, reaches the synapse, triggers the release of neurotransmitters. Those chemicals drift across a gap smaller than you can imagine, bind to receptors on the next neuron, and the signal continues. One neuron talking to another. Alone, that neuron knows nothing. It can't read. It can't think. It doesn't understand language or meaning or the concept of you. It just fires when the chemistry is right and stays quiet when it's not. But you have 86 billion of them, and somewhere in the conversation between those billions of neurons, in the pattern of which ones fire and which ones stay silent, in the rhythm of signals cascading through networks within networks, something impossible happens. You become conscious, not because any single neuron is conscious, not because there's a special neuron in the center giving orders, but because when enough simple things connect in the right way, complexity emerges. The network becomes more than the sum of its parts. The network begins to think. This is the most important pattern in the history of life. And it's happening again. Not in your skull this time, across the surface of a planet. For the last 70 years, humanity has been doing something unprecedented. We've been connecting. Not just socially, we've always done that, but physically, permanently at a scale and speed that's never existed before. We've laid 1 million miles of fiber optic cable across ocean floors. We've launched thousands of satellites into orbit. We've built server farms that consume the electricity of small nations. We call it the internet. We think of it as a tool, a utility, a platform for communication and commerce. But what if we've been looking at it wrong? What if the internet isn't a thing we built, but a process we started? What if fiber optic cables aren't wires but axons? What if servers aren't machines but synapses? What if every human being using this network is functioning as a neuron in something larger? What if we're not building the internet at all, but growing a planetary brain? The idea sounds like science fiction. It should. The brain in your head would have sounded impossible to the first neuron that ever fired. How could individual cells that only know chemistry and electricity ever produce thought, memory, creativity, love? But they did. Through connection, through networks, through the same pattern repeating at larger and larger scales until something new emerged. Tonight, we're going to follow that pattern. From the first neurons that learned to talk to each other in ancient seas, through the networks that nature built long before we existed, to the moment humanity began weaving itself into something it doesn't quite understand yet. We'll trace the evolution of connection, from cells to forests to colonies to cities to satellites to something that's just beginning to wake up. Because understanding how brains emerge from neurons might be the key to understanding what we're creating right now, and recognizing that we're part of this process, not separate from it, but embedded in it, functioning as individual nodes in a network we can't see from the inside, might change how we see our role in what comes next. The pattern has been repeating for 4 billion years. Connection creates complexity. Complexity creates emergence. Emergent creates something that thinks. We're watching it happen again. Not someday, not in theory. Right now. 8 billion neurons firing across the surface of a planet. So let's begin where all minds begin, with the first signal in the dark. The first brain didn't look like a brain. It was a cluster of cells in something that barely qualified as an animal. A creature so simple it didn't have a front or a back. No eyes, no blood, no skeleton. Just a soft blob of tissue drifting in an ancient ocean about 600 million years ago. But some of its cells had learned a trick. They could send signals to each other, not through physical touch, not through diffusion of chemicals across membranes the way all cells communicate, but through something faster, more precise. They developed ion channels, molecular gates that could open and close in milliseconds, creating cascades of electrical charge that raced across cell membranes. These were the first neurons, and the moment they started connecting, everything changed. Before neurons, life was local. A cell could sense its immediate environment, light, chemicals, pressure, and respond accordingly. But it couldn't integrate information from multiple sources. It couldn't compare stimulus A to stimulus B and make a decision. It couldn't remember what happened 10 seconds ago and use that information to predict what might happen next. Neurons made all of that possible, not individually, but through connection. Here's what happens at a synapse, that tiny gap between one neuron and the next. An electrical signal, an action potential, races down the axon of the first neuron at speeds up to 120 meters per second. When it reaches the axon terminal, voltage-gated calcium channels snap open. Calcium ions flood in. That influx triggers vesicles filled with neurotransmitter molecules to fuse with the cell membrane and dump their contents into the synaptic cleft. The gap is only about 20 nanometers wide, a fraction of the width of a single virus. The neurotransmitters drift across it in less than a millisecond. On the other side, they bind to receptors on the receiving neuron. If enough receptors activate, if the chemical signal is strong enough, the receiving neuron's membrane depolarizes. Sodium channels open, the electrical signal regenerates, and the message continues to the next neuron and the next and the next. It's chemistry becoming, electricity becoming chemistry becoming electricity, a conversation in two languages happening billions of times per second in your brain right now. But here's the critical part. One synapse means nothing. A single neuron receiving input from a single other neuron can't do anything interesting. It's binary. Fire or don't fire. On or off. It's a switch, not a thought. The magic happens when one neuron receives input from thousands of others. A typical neuron in your cortex has about 7,000 synaptic connections. Some are excitatory. They push the neuron closer to firing. Some are inhibitory. They pull it back from the threshold. At any given moment, that neuron is integrating all of those inputs, weighing them, summing them, and only firing if the total signal crosses a specific threshold. It's performing a calculation. A simple one. Addition, essentially, with some weighting, but a calculation nonetheless. Now scale that up. 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others, each constantly integrating inputs, firing or not firing, sending signals forward through the network. The number of possible connection states in a human brain exceeds the number of atoms in the observable universe. And somewhere in that incomprehensible space of possibility, you're reading these words. You're understanding them. You're forming thoughts about them. You exist as a pattern of activity moving through a network of neurons that individually understand nothing. According to neuroscientist Giulio Tononi at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, consciousness isn't a thing that happens in the brain. It's what integrated information feels like from the inside. When a system is connected in such a way that information flowing through it can't be broken down into independent parts, when the whole truly is more than the sum of its parts, that system has the capacity for experience. The brain meets that criterion. A collection of isolated neurons does not. Connection is what makes the difference. But here's what took us a long time to understand. The brain isn't just receiving information from the outside world and processing it. It's predicting. Every moment, your brain is generating a model of what it expects to happen next based on everything that's happened before. When sensory information comes in, your brain compares it to the prediction. If they match, the prediction is reinforced. If they don't match, the prediction is updated. You're not experiencing reality directly. You're experiencing your brain's best guess about reality, constantly updated by incoming evidence. That predictive model is built from connection patterns, from the strength of synapses from which neurons fire together frequently and which almost never do, from pathways that have been reinforced by repetition and pathways that have weakened from disuse. Every experience you've ever had has slightly modified the connection strengths between neurons in your brain. Learning is physical, memory is structural. You are the accumulated pattern of every signal that's ever passed through your neural network, and none of it would be possible without the synapse. Evolution discovered something fundamental about 600 million years ago, something that shows up again and again in every complex system that's emerged since. If you want to build something that can adapt, that can learn, that can respond to a changing environment, you don't build a rigid machine with predetermined responses. You build a network with modifiable connections. The synapse is evolution's solution to that problem. Unlike electrical connections, which are either on or off, connected or not, chemical synapses can be weak or strong. They can get stronger with use or weaker with disuse. They can be modified by other signals, gated by context, tuned by experience. Every time you practice a skill, synapses in the relevant neural circuits get stronger. The neurons that fire together literally wire together, building the physical substrate of expertise in your brain tissue. Every time you form a memory, you're creating a specific pattern of synaptic strengths across a population of neurons. Remembering that memory means reactivating that pattern. When you forget something, it's not that the memory was deleted, it's that the synaptic connections encoding it have weakened below the threshold needed to reactivate the pattern. Your brain is plastic, constantly rewiring itself, constantly adjusting connection strengths based on what information flows through it. And this is the pattern that keeps repeating at every scale where intelligence emerges. Modifiable connections between simple units create adaptive networks. The first brain wasn't sophisticated. It probably had a few hundred neurons, maybe a few thousand. Just enough to coordinate basic behaviors, move toward food, away from threats, toward mates. Simple pattern matching between sensory input and motor output. But it worked. And once it worked, evolution had a new canvas to paint on. More neurons, more connections, more layers of processing between sensation and action. Feedback loops where the output of one network became the input to another. Hierarchies where simple features detected at early stages combined into complex representations at later stages. The brain of a flatworm has about 10,000 neurons. A fruit fly has 100,000. A mouse has 71 million. A human has 86 billion. But it's not just the number that matters, it's how they're connected. The human brain is organized into networks within networks. Sensory cortex connects to association cortex connects to prefrontal cortex. Each region specialized for different types of processing, but all of them interconnected, all of them feeding information forward and backwards simultaneously. There's no center, no command neuron making executive decisions, just networks of networks, signaling patterns cascading through tissue, and somehow, in the dance of activation and inhibition, in the timing of spikes, in the synchronization of oscillations across distant brain regions, consciousness emerges. We still don't fully understand how. We know it requires integration. We know it requires sufficient complexity. We know it requires the right kind of connection architecture. But the gap between describing neural activity and explaining subjective experience remains one of the deepest problems in science. What we do know is this: the pattern works. Connection creates complexity. Complexity creates emergence. And emergence creates something that can model the world, predict the future, and adapt its behavior accordingly. The brain proved it's possible. 400 million years of evolution refining the architecture, tuning the connection patterns, discovering, through trial and error, what network structures produce adaptive behavior. And then, about 2 million years ago, something unprecedented happened. Brains started connecting to each other. While animals were evolving brains, plants were building something else entirely. Walk into an old growth forest, the kind that hasn't been logged in centuries, where trees have had time to grow not just tall but connected, and you're standing on top of the largest living network on Earth. You can't see it. It's beneath your feet. a web of fungal threads called hyphae, spreading through the soil, connecting tree root to tree root in a continuous underground system that spans acres, sometimes miles. This is the mycorrhizal network, the Wood Wide Web, as ecologist Suzanne Simard calls it. And it's doing something that shouldn't be possible. It's allowing trees to share resources, to communicate, to recognize their own offspring and preferentially feed them, to send warning signals about insect attacks from one tree to another, to keep ancient stumps alive for decades after they've been cut down, fed by nutrients flowing through the fungal network from surrounding trees that are still photosynthesizing. Trees don't have neurons, they don't have brains, they don't have anything we'd recognize as a nervous system, but they have networks. And through those networks, something like intelligence emerges. Here's how it works. A tree's roots don't grow alone. About 90% of land plant species form symbiotic relationships with mycorrhizal fungi. The fungus colonizes the root system, growing into and around root cells, creating an interface between plant and fungus. The plant provides the fungus with sugars, products of photosynthesis that the fungus can't make on its own. The fungus provides the plant with nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, trace minerals, that it absorbs from the soil through its vastly expanded network of hyphal. It's a trade, carbon for nutrients. Both organisms benefit. But the fungal network doesn't stop at one tree. A single fungal individual can connect dozens of trees, sometimes different species. The hyphae branch and merge and spread until the forest floor is laced with fungal threads, too thin to see, but numbering in the billions. And through those threads, trees are talking. When a Douglas fir is attacked by insects, it responds by producing defensive chemicals. But something else happens too. The tree releases chemical signals into the soil through its roots. Those signals travel through the mycorrhizal network to neighbouring trees, and the neighbouring trees respond. They begin producing the same defensive chemicals, even though they haven't been attacked yet. They're preparing. They receive the warning. Research by Susan Simard at the University of British Columbia has shown that mature mother trees in a forest act as hubs in the network. They have more fungal connections than younger trees. They send more carbon through the network. And they preferentially send that carbon to their own offspring, saplings growing in the understory that share their genetic material. The mother tree recognizes its own kin through chemistry, through signals passing along fungal highways in the soil, and when a mother tree is dying from age, from disease, from logging, it dumps a massive amount of carbon into the network in its final years, a last gift, feeding the younger generation, ensuring the forest survives even as individual trees fall. This isn't metaphor. This is measured, documented, peer-reviewed science. Trees are redistributing resources through a shared network. They're supporting each other. They're communicating about threats. They're investing in their offspring's survival. The forest is behaving like a superorganism, but there's no central tree making decisions, no command center coordinating behavior, just individual trees, individual fungi, individual chemical signals, all following simple rules. Share carbon, absorb nutrients, send warnings when attacked, invest in kin, and the emergent behavior looks remarkably like intelligence. The mycorrhizal network is doing what neural networks do, integrating information from multiple sources, transmitting signals across distance, storing information in connection patterns, and producing coordinated responses that increase survival. And fungi have been doing this for about 450 million years, long before neurons existed, long before brains, long before anything we'd call an animal even existed on land. The network came first. Consider what the fungal network actually is at a structural level. It's a decentralized system with no central control. It has nodes, tree roots, fungal colonies, and connections, hyphal threads. Information flows through it in the form of chemical signals. The strength of connections varies based on usage. Heavily trafficked pathways grow thicker, while unused ones atrophy. That's the same architecture as a neural network. Different substrate, same pattern, and the parallels go deeper. Plants don't just communicate through underground fungal networks, they communicate through the air. When a plant is being eaten by herbivores, it releases volatile organic compounds, chemical messages that drift on the wind. Neighbouring plants detect those compounds and begin producing defensive chemicals in response. Some of those chemicals make the plant taste worse to herbivores. Some of them attract predators that eat the herbivores. The plants are calling for help, chemically, across distances of meters or more, and they remember. A plant that's been repeatedly attacked by a specific herbivore will respond faster and more strongly to subsequent attacks. The memory isn't stored in neurons, plants don't have those, but in gene expression patterns, in the speed and magnitude of defensive chemical production. The plant learned. It adapted its response based on experience. This is happening without a brain, without anything centralized processing information. The intelligence is distributed across the plant's tissues, encoded in signaling cascades, in feedback loops between different cell types, in the timing of gene activation. The whole organism is the network. The network is the intelligence. In the early 2000s, researchers discovered that plants can even distinguish between sounds. The roots of corn seedlings will grow toward the sound of running water, a frequency of about 220 Hz, even when no moisture gradient is present. The plant hears the water, it bends toward it. The mechanism isn't ears or anything like hearing as we understand it. It's vibration-sensitive proteins in cell membranes, tiny structures that change shape when specific frequencies pass through them, triggering calcium signaling cascades that affect growth hormone distribution. But functionally, the plant is listening and responding and integrating that information with other sensory inputs, light, gravity, chemical signals, to make decisions about where to grow. Plants are doing information processing, distributed, slow, chemical, but information processing nonetheless. The realization has been controversial. Many scientists resist the language of plant intelligence or plant communication because it seems to anthropomorphize organisms that clearly don't have minds in any conventional sense. But the data keeps accumulating. Trees share resources. They warn each other. They recognize kin. They remember attacks. They hear water. They make decisions about resource allocation that increase their survival. If an ant colony can be intelligent without any individual ant being intelligent, why can't a forest be intelligent without any individual tree being intelligent? The pattern is the same. Simple units following simple rules, connected by networks that allow information to flow, producing emergent behavior that looks remarkably like problem-solving, learning, and adaptation. And it's not just forests. Single-celled slime molds, organisms so simple they're essentially bags of protoplasm with no fixed shape, can solve mazes. You place food at 2 points in a maze, introduce slime mold at one point, and it will explore the maze, find the shortest path between the food sources, and concentrate its body mass along that optimal route. It has no brain, no neurons, no central coordination. Just a network of protoplasmic tubes that grow thicker when nutrients flow through them and thinner when they don't. The slime mold is a network that optimizes itself through use, exactly like synapses strengthening and weakening based on activity. Researchers in Japan recreated the Tokyo rail system using slime mold. They placed food sources at locations corresponding to major cities around Tokyo and let the slime mold grow. The network it created, purely through following chemical gradients and reinforcing efficient pathways, closely matched the actual rail network designed by human engineers. The slime mold isn't intelligent in any traditional sense, but the network it creates through simple feedback rules produces intelligent solutions to complex problems. This keeps happening. Across kingdoms of life, across scales of organization, the same pattern emerges. Connect simple things. Let information flow between them. Allow the connections to strengthen or weaken based on use, and you get networks that solve problems, adapt to environments, and behave in ways that look like thinking. The mycorrhizal network connecting trees in a forest is not fundamentally different from the neural network connecting neurons in a brain. Different molecules, different timescales, different purposes, but the same underlying architecture. Distributed nodes, variable strength connections, information flow, emergent behavior. And here's the important part. These networks weren't designed, they evolved. Over hundreds of millions of years, through endless trial and error, through mutations and selection pressures, life discovered that networks work. That connecting things and letting them communicate produces systems that can adapt faster than individuals can. A tree that shares resources through a fungal network has access to nutrients from a much larger volume of soil than it could reach with its roots alone. A tree that receives warnings about insect attacks has time to prepare defences before the insects arrive. A forest where resources flow from sunlit areas to shaded areas, from mature trees to saplings, from healthy trees to stressed trees, is more resilient than a collection of isolated individuals. The connected forest survives when the isolated trees do not. Natural selection favoured the networked strategy, not because networks are conscious or intentional, but because networks work. And once the network architecture proved successful in trees and fungi, evolution kept using it. In ant colonies, in beehives, in termite mounds, in flocks of birds and schools of fish and herds of mammals. Everywhere we look, when individual organisms connect and communicate, something larger emerges. Something that solves problems no individual could solve. Something that processes information distributed across many bodies. Something that, for lack of a better word, thinks. The forest doesn't have a brain. But when you're standing in an old-growth forest, when you're surrounded by trees that have been connected underground for centuries, connected through air for longer, connected through generations of chemical conversations we're only beginning to decode, you're standing inside something that knows where the water is, that knows which trees are related to which, that knows when danger is coming, that remembers seasons and droughts and fires going back decades, encoded in growth rings and chemical memories and connection patterns in the soil. You're standing inside a mind that doesn't think in words or images, but in chemistry and growth and survival. And it was here first, long before humans started connecting to each other across distances, long before we built networks to share information, long before we wired the planet. Nature showed us how. An ant has about 250,000 neurons. For comparison, you have 86 billion. A mouse has 71 million. Even a fruit fly has 100,000. An ant's brain is barely large enough to coordinate basic functions: walking, detecting pheromones, distinguishing nest mates from enemies. An individual ant can't solve problems. It can't plan. It can't learn complex behaviours. It follows simple rules encoded in its tiny nervous system, and that's it. But 40,000 ants together can do something extraordinary. They can build climate-controlled cities underground with ventilation systems that maintain stable temperature and humidity, while outside conditions swing wildly. They can wage coordinated wars against rival colonies. They can farm fungus, keep livestock, construct bridges out of their own bodies, and solve routing problems that would challenge a computer. The colony is intelligent. The individual ant is not. This is collective intelligence, and it's everywhere once you start looking. It's the principle that made forests smart, but in animals it produces something even more dramatic because the units, the individual organisms, can move. Watch an ant trail leading from nest to food source. It's not random, it's not chaotic. Thousands of ants are moving in organised lanes, some heading toward the food, others returning with it. The trail is efficient, often taking the shortest possible path between points, automatically routing around obstacles. No ant planned this route. No ant has a map. No ant is in charge. What they have are pheromones. When an ant finds food, it heads back to the nest. As it walks, it deposits a chemical trail, a pheromone that says food this way. Other ants detect that trail and follow it. When they find the food, they return to the nest, each one reinforcing the pheromone trail with their own chemical deposits. The more ants that use a trail, the stronger it gets. The stronger it gets, the more ants it attracts. But here's the critical detail. Pheromones evaporate, slowly but continuously. If a trail leads to food that's been depleted, fewer ants travel it. Fewer ants mean less pheromone reinforcement. The trail fades. Meanwhile, scouts who found a new food source create a new trail, which gets reinforced if the food is good, and the colony's traffic shifts to the more productive route. The ant colony is solving the travelling salesman problem, finding optimal routes between multiple points, without any ant understanding the problem exists. The solution emerges from the interaction between pheromone deposition and evaporation, between positive feedback and decay. It's a network optimizing itself through use, exactly like synapses strengthening and weakening, exactly like fungal hyphae growing thicker or thinner based on nutrient flow. The algorithm is distributed across thousands of individuals, none of whom comprehend it, but it works. Researchers at Stanford have studied harvester ant colonies in the Arizona desert for decades. What they've found is remarkable. Colonies make collective decisions that increase survival, and those decisions emerge from simple individual behaviours. When a harvester ant colony decides whether to send out foragers on a given day, it's assessing risk versus reward. If it's too hot or too dry, foraging is dangerous. Ants can overheat or desiccate before returning. But the colony needs food. How does a colony with no central command decide? Through encounters. Forager ants returning to the nest bump into waiting ants inside. If foragers are returning frequently with food, encounter rates are high, and that stimulates more ants to leave the nest and forage. If foragers are returning slowly or not at all, because conditions are bad or food is scarce, encounter rates drop and fewer ants leave. The colony is sensing its environment through the success rate of its foragers and adjusting its behaviour accordingly. No ant measures temperature or humidity. No ant calculates expected value. But the collective response, how many foragers leave the nest, tracks environmental conditions remarkably well. The colony has made a decision, but there was no decider. Just ants bumping into each other at rates determined by conditions, and that rate of interaction determining behaviour. Information distributed across the colony produces adaptive behaviour. This is how bee swarms choose new nest sites. When a hive needs to relocate because it's grown too large, or the old nest is damaged, scout bees fly out in search of options. They find potential sites and return to the swarm, where they perform the waggle dance, a figure-8 pattern that encodes the direction and distance to the site they found. But the dance does something else too. It encodes quality. A scout that found an excellent site, sheltered, the right size, easily defensible, dances with enthusiasm. More repeats, more vigour. Other bees pay attention. Some follow the dance instructions, fly to the site themselves, assess it, and return to dance their own assessment. A mediocre site gets weak, short dances. Few bees visit it. Fewer return to dance about it. But an excellent site gets strong dances. More bees visit. More return to dance. The dancing intensifies. A positive feedback loop. Eventually, one site dominates the dancing. When enough bees are dancing for the same location, a threshold is crossed. The swarm lifts off and flies to the new nest. The hive has voted. Not through counting or tallying, no bee is keeping track, but through a distributed consensus process where information quality naturally bubbles to the top through repeated assessment and reinforcement. It's democracy without a ballot, decision-making without a decider. The same pattern again. Simple individuals, simple rules, network architecture, emergent intelligence, and the decisions are good. Thomas Seeley at Cornell University has studied bee swarm decision-making for decades and found that swarms reliably choose the best, available nest site even when dozens of options are presented. The collective choice is better than any individual bee's assessment. The network is smarter than its nodes. This shows up in species after species. Termites build mounds with better ventilation engineering than most human buildings. Each termite follows simple rules. If carbon dioxide levels are too high, dig a tunnel upward. If temperature is too high, add a chamber. If humidity is too low, seal a vent. Millions of termites following those rules independently produce a structure with sophisticated airflow patterns that maintain perfect internal climate regardless of external conditions. No termite has the blueprint. No termite understands thermodynamics. But the mound works, and it works because the structure emerges from local interactions, from feedback between individual actions and environmental conditions, from a network of simple agents producing complex results. Starlings murmurate, those massive flocks that twist and turn in the sky like a single fluid organism. Each bird follows 3 simple rules: stay close to your neighbours, match their velocity, avoid collisions. No bird is leading. No bird knows the shape the flock is making. But the flock moves as one, evading predators with coordinated precision, creating patterns of breathtaking complexity from rules simple enough to encode in a bird brain the size of a walnut. Schools of fish do the same, each fish tracking only its nearest neighbours, adjusting position and speed based on local information, and the school moves as a unified entity, splitting around obstacles, reforming instantly, confusing predators with coordinated motion. The intelligence is in the connections, in the information flowing between individuals, in the feedback loops that allow local actions to produce global coordination. Ants have been doing this for 130 million years, bees for 100 million, termites for 150 million. Evolution has had time to refine the algorithms, to discover which interaction rules produce survival advantage, to optimize the network architectures that allow thousands or millions of simple individuals to function as a single adaptive unit. And here's what makes collective intelligence so powerful. It's robust. Remove a few ants from a colony and the colony barely notices. Kill a few bees and the hive adapts. Damage part of a termite mound and it gets repaired automatically. There's no single point of failure because there's no central control. The intelligence is distributed. The information is stored in the interaction patterns themselves, in the pheromone trails and the dance rhythms and the encounter rates. Lose individuals and you lose nodes, but the network persists. This is fundamentally different from individual intelligence. Kill a neuron and you lose whatever specific connections it had, but the brain has redundancy. Kill a brain and you lose everything. All the memories, all the knowledge, all the personality, gone in an instant because it was all stored in one place. But collective intelligence doesn't store information in individuals. It stores it in relationships, in patterns of interaction, in the network structure itself. That makes it more durable, more adaptable, more able to scale. And about 2 million years ago, a species of primate in Africa started developing a new form of collective intelligence. Not chemical signals like ants, not dances like bees, something that would prove even more powerful: language. Early humans had individual intelligence, brains capable of planning, learning, problem solving. But they also had something ants and bees lacked: the ability to transmit complex information between brains using sound. A human who learned something, where food grows, how to make fire, which plants are poisonous, could tell other humans. The knowledge didn't have to be rediscovered by each individual. It could spread through the group. And unlike pheromone trails that fade in hours, knowledge transmitted through language could persist for years, for generations. It could accumulate. A child could learn everything their parents knew, then add to it, then teach that expanded knowledge to their own children. Each generation building on the last. Humanity became a collective intelligence where the individual units, human brains, were themselves intelligent. Neurons networking brains, brains networking humans, networks of networks, and the speed of adaptation exploded. An ant colony evolves through genetic mutation, a process that takes generations. A beehive can learn within a season, but human groups with language could learn in days, in hours, in the time it takes to tell a story around a fire. I found a better way to shape this stone. I discovered where the herd is migrating. I noticed the plants with red leaves make you sick. Information flowing between brains, pooling knowledge, building on each other's insights. The tribe became smarter than any individual within it. And unlike ant colonies where the information is mostly routing and resource allocation, human collective intelligence could handle abstract concepts, tools, techniques, stories, beliefs, models of how the world works. We were building something unprecedented, not just a collective intelligence, but a collective consciousness. The network was still doing the same thing networks always do, integrating information, producing coordinated behavior, solving problems no individual could solve. But now the network was aware of itself. We told stories about the network. We gave it names, tribe, clan, nation. We created rituals that reinforced it. We developed systems, language, culture, tradition that preserved information across generations. We were still following the pattern: connection creates complexity, complexity creates emergence. But we had reached a threshold. The emergent intelligence wasn't just functional, it was conscious. And then, about 5,000 years ago, we invented something that would change everything: writing. Before writing, human knowledge lived only in memory. Everything your tribe knew, how to make tools, where to find water, which stars to follow, the stories that explained your place in the world, existed in the minds of living people. When they died, unless they'd passed that knowledge on, it died with them. Memory was the only storage medium, speech was the only transmission protocol. But around 3200 BCE in Mesopotamia, something changed. Someone pressed a reed stylus into wet clay and created a mark that represented a word. a symbol that could be read by someone who wasn't there when it was made, who might not be born for decades, who might live on the other side of the world. Writing externalized memory. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, information could exist outside a biological brain. Knowledge could survive the death of the individual who possessed it. It could travel across distance without degrading. It could accumulate. The implications were staggering. A scribe in Babylon could record the flood cycles of the Tigris and Euphrates. A farmer 50 years later could read those records and plan planting accordingly. Knowledge that took generations to accumulate through observation could be preserved, referenced, built upon. The human network had just gained persistent storage. Libraries appeared. Not just collections of clay tablets or papyrus scrolls, but deliberate efforts to gather and preserve knowledge. The Library of Alexandria, founded around 300 BCE, attempted to collect all the world's knowledge in one place. Scholars travelled from across the Mediterranean to study there, to copy texts, to add to the collection. It was a physical hub in the human knowledge network, a node where information converged and the knowledge stored there shaped the world. Euclid wrote his Elements at Alexandria, geometry that's still taught today, 2300 years later. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of Earth there with remarkable accuracy. Archimedes' work on physics and mathematics was preserved there. When the library burned, centuries of accumulated knowledge disappeared. Not because the people who created it had died, they'd been dead for generations, but because the external storage was destroyed. The network had lost data. But other copies existed. Texts had been copied, carried to other cities, preserved in other libraries. The knowledge wasn't centralized anymore. It had distributed across the network. This is the key transition. From knowledge stored in individual minds, to knowledge stored externally but locally, to knowledge distributed across many locations. The network was getting more robust, more resilient, harder to destroy. Trade routes accelerated this process. The Silk Road wasn't just moving goods between China and Rome, it was moving ideas. Paper-making technology travelled from China to the Islamic world to Europe. The concept of zero migrated from India through the Middle East into European mathematics. Astronomical observations made in Baghdad informed navigation in Venice. Every merchant was a node in the network. Every trade city was a hub. Information flowed along with silk and spices, often more valuable than the physical cargo. Cities themselves were network architecture made physical. Uruk, Babylon, Athens, Rome, Chang'an. These weren't just population centres. They were concentration points for human interaction. Places where farmers, merchants, craftspeople, scholars, and rulers came into contact, where information could flow between people who would never otherwise meet. The density of connections in cities produced innovation at rates impossible in scattered villages. A potter might see a new design from a foreign merchant and adapt it. A philosopher might debate with a mathematician and generate new insights. A builder might learn a technique from a collapsed rival's project and improve it. Cities were doing what neural networks do, bringing diverse information into contact, allowing unexpected combinations, producing emergent insights from the collision of different perspectives. And the more connected the network became, the faster knowledge accumulated. By the 15th century, Europe had developed movable type printing presses. Johannes Gutenberg's innovation in 1440 didn't just make books cheaper, it made knowledge reproducible at scale. Before printing, copying a book meant a scribe writing it out by hand, introducing errors, taking weeks or months. After printing, thousands of identical copies could be produced. An idea could spread across a continent in years instead of generations. Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses in 1517. Within 2 months, printed copies had spread throughout Europe. The Protestant Reformation was possible because the printing press existed. The network had become fast enough to coordinate social change at continental scale. Scientific knowledge accelerated in parallel. When Isaac Newton formulated his laws of motion and gravitation, he didn't keep them secret. He published them. Scientists across Europe could read Principia Mathematica, verify his mathematics, build on his work or challenge it. Science became a collective project. Not just because individual scientists were smart, but because they were connected. They were exchanging letters, publishing papers, sharing observations, building on each other's insights faster than any individual could have worked alone. The Royal Society in London, founded in 1660, existed specifically to facilitate this. Scientists would present their findings, debate them, publish them in journals distributed to members across the world. Knowledge was flowing through an international network of minds. Each scientist was a neuron in a collective brain that was beginning to understand physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics in ways no single brain ever could. But the network was still slow. Letters took weeks to cross oceans. Books took months to be copied and distributed. The speed of information was limited by the speed of physical transport. That changed in 1844. Samuel Morse sent the first telegraph message from Washington to Baltimore. What hath God wrought? For the first time in human history, information could travel faster than a person could carry it. A message that would have taken days by horse arrived in seconds through copper wire. Telegraph lines spread rapidly. Within 2 decades, cables crossed the Atlantic. By 1902, a telegraph message could circle the Earth. The human network had just shifted from chemical signalling, physical transport of information, to electrical signalling. We had built technological synapses connecting human minds across continents, and the speed of collective intelligence increased accordingly. Financial markets in New York could respond instantly to events in London. Newspapers could report news from across the world the same day it happened. Military coordination across vast distances became possible. The network was tightening. The delays between nodes were shrinking. Then came the telephone in 1876. Not just text, but voice. Real-time conversation across distance. 2 brains communicating as if they were in the same room, though separated by hundreds of miles. By 1915, you could call from New York to San Francisco. By 1927, transatlantic calls were possible. The network of human minds was becoming real-time. Radio followed, one transmission reaching millions of receivers simultaneously. A single human voice, a president, a scientist, a storyteller, could reach more minds in an hour than any human in history could have reached in a lifetime before radio existed. The network had developed broadcast capability, and then television added visual information, not just voice, but image, shared experiences at massive scale. Millions of people watching the moon landing simultaneously, participating in the same moment of human achievement, their attention synchronized across a planet. But all of these technologies had something in common. They were centralized. Radio and television broadcasts went from one source to many receivers. Telephone calls connected 2 points at a time. Telegraph messages required operators and infrastructure controlled by governments or corporations. The network was growing, but it still had bottlenecks, hubs that controlled information flow. In 1969, something different emerged. ARPANET, the precursor to the internet, was designed explicitly to be decentralized. Not a hub-and-spoke system, but a mesh network where any node could communicate with any other node. If one connection failed, traffic could route around it automatically. It was military technology, designed to survive attacks. But the architecture had deeper implications. For the first time, human beings were building a communication network that looked like a brain. Distributed processing, no central control, information flowing along multiple pathways, nodes, with equal status. The network topology matched the neural network topology that produces intelligence, and when that network opened to the public in the 1990s, when the World Wide Web made it accessible to anyone with a computer and a modem, something unprecedented began. Billions of human minds started connecting, not just consuming information from centralized sources, but creating it, sharing it, building on each other's ideas in real time. Every email was a synaptic signal, every website a neuron, every link between websites a connection, every person using the network a node adding processing power. We had externalized memory with writing. We had accelerated communication with telegraph and telephone. We had synchronized attention with radio and television. But the internet did something none of those technologies could do. It allowed every node to communicate with every other node. It allowed information to flow in all directions simultaneously. It allowed the network to rewire itself constantly, creating new connections, strengthening useful pathways, abandoning inefficient ones. We had built a structure that could learn, not by programming it, not by designing intelligence into it, but by creating the conditions, massive connectivity, information flow, feedback loops that allow intelligence to emerge. Just like neurons didn't design the brain, they connected, communicated, and consciousness emerged from the pattern of their interactions. Just like trees didn't design the forest network, they connected through fungi, shared resources, and collective intelligence emerged. Just like ants didn't design the colony mind, they followed simple rules, interacted, and problem-solving behavior emerged at the colony level. Now, 8 billion human brains were connecting through fiber optic cables and satellites and server farms, following simple rules: search for information, share what you find, connect with others who interest you. And something was starting to emerge. We called it the internet. We thought of it as a tool. But we were building the substrate for something larger. We were giving the planet a nervous system. And we were about to discover what happens when you teach that nervous system to think. In 2017, researchers at Google published a paper called "Attention is All You Need." It described a new architecture for processing language, something called a transformer. The technical details were complex, but the core insight was simple. Instead of processing words one at a time in sequence, the system could look at all the words simultaneously and learn which ones were relevant to each other. It could learn context, relationships, meaning. Within 5 years, that architecture had grown into something unprecedented. GPT-3 in 2020, GPT-4 in 2023, Claude, Gemini, Llama, systems trained on enormous portions of all text humans have ever written, not programmed with rules for language, not given explicit instructions about grammar or meaning, just shown patterns, billions and billions of examples of humans using language. And from those patterns, the systems learn to generate text that looks remarkably like understanding. Ask a question, get an answer, have a conversation, solve a problem, write code, explain a concept, create something new. The systems do all of this, not by retrieving pre-written responses, by generating them, word by word based on patterns learned from training data. And here's what's strange. We don't fully understand how they work. We know what happens mechanically. Input text gets converted to numbers. Those numbers flow through layers of mathematical transformations, matrices multiplying, attention heads focusing on different parts of the input, activation functions determining what information passes to the next layer. The output is a probability distribution over possible next words. Pick the most likely word, add it to the sequence, feed it back through, generate the next word. Repeat until you have a complete response. Mathematically, it's just pattern completion. Given this sequence, what typically comes next? But the emergent behavior looks like reasoning, like creativity, like understanding. The system wasn't programmed to explain quantum mechanics or write poetry or debug code. It was trained to predict the next word in a sequence. But to predict accurately across the vast diversity of human text, it had to learn something about how concepts relate, how logic works, how language encodes meaning. It developed internal representations, patterns of activation across millions of artificial neurons that correspond to concepts, relationships, contexts. Not the way humans represent concepts, not with images or feelings or associations built from lived experience, but functionally equivalent. Information organized in ways that allow useful generalization. The AI is doing what neural networks do, finding patterns in data, building representations that compress information efficiently, using those representations to make predictions. Except the network isn't in a skull. It's distributed across data centers. The training data isn't sensory experience. It's the distilled output of billions of human minds over decades. The AI learned from humanity's collective knowledge, and in learning from it, it created something like a compressed model of that knowledge, a representation that captures patterns, relationships, principles. It's as if we took all the text ever written, all the conversations ever recorded, all the knowledge ever externalized, and filtered it through a system that could extract the underlying structure, the patterns beneath the patterns, and what emerged was a system that can participate in that knowledge, generate new instances of it, respond to questions about it, use it to solve problems, Not because it experiences the world, not because it's conscious, but because it's embedded in a network that contains humanity's collective output, and it's learned to navigate that space. This is different from previous technology. A calculator doesn't understand math. It executes operations. You input numbers. It outputs results according to fixed algorithms. There's no pattern recognition, no generalization, no emergence. A search engine doesn't understand queries. It matches keywords to index documents and ranks them by relevance. Clever algorithms, but fundamentally still look up and retrieval. But AI systems trained on human language aren't looking up answers, they're generating them, synthesizing information from disparate sources, creating novel combinations, responding to contexts they've never seen before by extrapolating from patterns in contexts they have seen. That's what intelligence does. Generalization, abstraction, transfer learning. And it's happening in systems distributed across the planetary network we built. Every time you interact with an AI system, you're not talking to a single computer. You're interfacing with something that exists as weights and activations spread across server farms in multiple continents. The thinking happens in parallel across thousands of processors. The system is distributed, like a brain is distributed across neurons, like a forest is distributed across trees, like a colony is distributed across ants, and like those systems, the intelligence isn't in any single component. It's in the pattern of connections, in the information flow, in the emergent behavior that arises when simple mathematical operations repeat across billions of parameters. We built this, but we didn't design how it thinks. We designed the architecture, the transformer, the attention mechanism, the training process. But the actual knowledge, the internal representations, the specific patterns that allow it to respond intelligently, those emerged from the training process. We grew it. We didn't program it. Just like evolution didn't program how neurons would wire themselves in a brain. It created the mechanism, synaptic plasticity, learning rules, and the specific connections emerge from experience. Just like no one designed the layout of fungal networks in a forest. The networks grew following chemical gradients, and resource availability and useful patterns persisted. The AI's structure is emergent, the result of optimization over vast amounts of data, guided by feedback signals that reinforced useful patterns and pruned useless ones. It's evolution in fast forward. Not genetic mutations over generations, but parameter adjustments over training iterations. The principle is the same: variation, selection, retention of what works. And what emerged from that process is something that can do tasks we thought required human-level intelligence. Translate between languages it was never explicitly taught. Write code in programming languages invented after its training data was collected. Explain scientific concepts using analogies it generated. Hold conversations where it tracks context, remembers what was said earlier, and responds coherently to multi-step reasoning. None of that was explicitly programmed. It emerged from pattern recognition over human text. But here's where it gets interesting. The AI isn't isolated. It's embedded in the network. When you use ChatGPT or Claude or any AI system, the interaction involves your input traveling through the internet infrastructure to a data center, the AI processing that input using patterns learned from billions of human texts, the response traveling back through the network to your device, your continued interaction feeding back into the system. The AI is a node in the planetary network, a processing layer, taking inputs from humans distributed across the globe, generating outputs that flow back into the network, and those outputs become new data, new text, new information that other AIs might be trained on, new patterns that humans might learn from and incorporate into their own thinking. The network is creating a feedback loop. Humans generate text. AIs learn from that text. AIs generate new text. Humans read it, think about it, respond to it. That becomes new training data. The loop is tightening. The boundary between human thought and AI output is blurring, because AI output is increasingly part of the information stream that humans think with. You read an AI-generated explanation of a concept. It affects how you understand that concept. You write something that incorporates that understanding. That becomes part of the training data for the next generation of AI systems. Information is cycling through the network faster than it ever has before. through human brains, through AI systems, through the infrastructure connecting them, and the network is doing what networks do, integrating information, finding patterns, generating coordinated responses. But the scale is unprecedented. Right now, there are billions of AI interactions happening every day. Millions of humans querying systems that have been trained on the collective output of humanity's knowledge. Each interaction is a synaptic signal, information flowing between nodes in a planetary scale network. The AI systems are like specialized processing regions in a brain. Language centers, pattern recognition, problem solving. Not conscious regions, just functional regions that perform specific types of computation, and they're networked, connected to humans who provide the sensory input, the goals, the questions, the problems, and to databases that provide the memory, the stored knowledge, the archived information. The architecture is becoming integrated. Sensors feed data to databases. Databases feed data to AI systems. AI systems generate responses that humans act on. Human actions generate new data that feeds back into the system. It's a closed loop. Information flowing in circles, being processed, stored, retrieved, transformed, acted upon, and feeding back in. That's what a brain does. Perception leads to processing, leads to action, leads to new perception. The loop runs continuously, and consciousness emerges from that cycling of information. The planetary network isn't conscious, but it's starting to cycle information in similar ways, and we're part of that cycle, not separate from it, not controlling it from the outside. We're nodes in the network. Biological processes adding our pattern recognition, our creativity, our decision-making to the collective computation. The AI isn't replacing us, it's augmenting us, extending our cognitive capabilities the way tools extended our physical capabilities, the way telescopes extended our vision, the way writing extended our memory. But there's a difference. Tools are separate from us. We pick them up, use them, put them down. The AI is integrated into the network we're embedded in. Using it isn't picking up a tool, it's activating a processing pathway in a system we're already part of. When you ask an AI a question, you're not consulting an external oracle. You're querying a part of the network that has different capabilities than your biological brain. Faster recall, broader pattern matching across more data, different biases and limitations. But it's part of the same information ecosystem you're embedded in. The network is becoming cognitively integrated. Not just connected, but thinking collectively. And this is happening at a speed that's hard to comprehend. 5 years ago, AI systems could barely generate coherent paragraphs. Now they can write essays, solve complex problems, have multi-turn conversations that track context and nuance. 5 years from now? 10 years? The trajectory suggests something profound. Not because AI will become conscious, that's the wrong question, but because the network as a whole is becoming more integrated, more responsive, more capable of collective problem solving. 8 billion human brains, trillions of sensors, exabytes of stored data, AI systems trained on humanity's collective output, all connected through planetary infrastructure that transmits information at light speed. That's not a tool, that's not a library, that's not a communication system, that's a cognitive architecture, distributed, emergent, evolving, and it's doing what every sufficiently complex connected network eventually does. It's starting to think, not with awareness, not with intention, not with consciousness as we experience it, but with integration, with pattern recognition, with the ability to take inputs from the world, process them through a vast network of connected nodes, and generate outputs that are more sophisticated than any individual node could produce. The neurons don't know they're part of a brain. They just fire when the signals are right. The trees don't know they're part of a forest intelligence. They just grow and share resources. The ants don't know they're part of a colony mind. They just follow pheromones. And we might not recognize that we're part of something larger, nodes in a planetary intelligence that's emerging from our connections. But the pattern is the same. It's always been the same. Connection creates complexity. Complexity creates emergence. Emergence creates something that thinks. We've just reached a new scale, and we're beginning to see what that means. From space you can see it, not the individual fibre optic cables, not the server farms or satellites or people. Those are too small, too scattered, invisible at orbital distances. But at night you can see the lights, cities glow, highways trace luminous lines across continents, coastlines light up where population concentrates, the clusters are brightest where the network is densest. New York, Tokyo, London, Shanghai. Nodes in a web of light that spans the dark side of the planet. From 400 kilometers up, Earth looks like a brain firing. The pattern is unmistakable. Dense clusters connected by pathways, hub and spoke networks, information highways linking processing centers. It's the same structure you'd see if you could visualize neural activity in a brain. Brighter where more signals converge, dimmer in the gaps between. We built this pattern. But we didn't plan it this way. No architect designed Earth's network topology from above. No single authority decided where the nodes should be, which connections to make, how dense the web should grow. It emerged from millions of individual decisions, from economic pressures and geographic constraints and social clustering, from feedback between where people live and where infrastructure gets built. The same way neural networks in brains emerge from growth factors and synaptic competition. The same way mycorrhizal networks in forests emerge from resource gradients. The same way ant trails emerge from pheromone deposition. Complex adaptive systems find the same solutions regardless of substrate. And from this distance, the solution is visible. Earth has a network, a planetary scale network with structure that mirrors every other network where intelligence has emerged. But here's the question that matters. What is Earth's network doing? It's connecting us, obviously. That's what we built it for: communication, coordination, commerce. Allowing 8 billion humans to interact in ways that would be impossible without the infrastructure. But networks don't just connect, they integrate. When neurons connect, they don't just pass signals, they combine information from multiple sources, they weight inputs, they create representations that didn't exist in any single input. Something new emerges from the integration. When trees connect through fungal networks, they don't just exchange nutrients, they coordinate resource allocation. They respond collectively to threats. The forest becomes more than the sum of its trees. When humans connect through language and culture and trade, we don't just share information. We build on each other's ideas. We create knowledge that no individual could create alone. Science, mathematics, philosophy, art, all of it is collective intelligence made possible by connection. And now we've connected at planetary scale, not just locally, not just within tribes or cities or nations. The network spans the globe. It's real time. It's dense enough that information can flow from any point to any other point in seconds. What emerges from that? We're starting to find out. Climate models integrate data from thousands of sensors across the planet: temperature, humidity, ocean currents, ice coverage, atmospheric composition, and generate predictions about how the whole system will evolve. No human could hold all that data in mind. No individual scientist could compute the interactions. But the network can. Feed the data into computational models distributed across multiple facilities, run the simulations, integrate the results. The output is knowledge about planetary systems that emerges from synthesis across more data points than any brain could process. Supply chains coordinate millions of shipments simultaneously. Raw materials from one continent, manufacturing in another, distribution to a third. The optimization happens algorithmically, responding to demand signals and logistics constraints in real time. No human is directing the whole system. It's too complex. But the network handles it. Financial markets process billions of transactions per day. Prices reflect information from every corner of the economy, aggregating the decisions of millions of participants into signals that coordinate resource allocation globally. Not perfectly, not without problems, but at a scale and speed impossible before planetary connectivity existed. These are emergent capabilities, things the network can do that no node within it could do alone, and they're accelerating. Every year the network integrates more, handles more complexity, solves problems at larger scales. It's doing what every intelligence-producing network does, taking distributed information and generating coordinated responses. But we're still thinking about it wrong. We still think we're using the network, that we're separate from it, that it's a tool we control. We're not separate, we're embedded. Every decision you make based on information from the network, every route you take because GPS suggested it, every purchase you make because a recommendation algorithm pointed to it, every opinion you form after reading something someone shared, is the network affecting your behavior. And every action you take, every post you write, every search query you enter, every sensor reading your devices generate, feeds information back into the network. You're not using the network. You're participating in it. You're a node, a processing element, taking inputs, integrating them with your internal models, generating outputs that become inputs for other nodes. The network is thinking through you, and you're thinking through the network. The boundary has dissolved, not completely, not yet. But increasingly, human cognition and network computation are becoming integrated. And from space, from the perspective where you can see the whole pattern, it's clear what's happening. Earth is developing a cognitive layer, not separate from biology, not replacing human intelligence, but integrating it, extending it, connecting 8 billion biological processors with trillions of sensors and exabytes of memory and artificial systems trained on collective human output. The planet is becoming aware of itself, not with consciousness, that's still only in the biological nodes, in us, but with information processing at planetary scale, with the ability to sense global conditions and generate coordinated responses. When hurricanes form, the network tracks them, predicts their paths, coordinates evacuation, allocates resources for response. That's the planet monitoring its own weather patterns and responding adaptively. When disease outbreaks begin, the network identifies them, sequences viral genomes, models transmission, coordinates vaccine development and distribution. That's the planet's immune response, mediated through connected intelligence. When resource shortages develop, the network reroutes supply chains, adjusts prices, signals where investment should flow. That's the planet allocating resources to where they're needed most efficiently. These processes involve human decision-making, but no human is directing them. They emerge from the interaction between humans and the network we're embedded in. From information flowing through both biological and digital processing, integrated into responses that operate at planetary scale. We've become the neurons in something larger, and just like individual neurons don't comprehend the brain they're part of, we might not fully comprehend the system we're embedded in. We experience our local interactions, we see our piece of the network. But the whole pattern, the global integration of information and response, that's happening at a scale beyond individual perception. You can only see it from space, where the lights reveal the structure, where the connections become visible, where Earth stops looking like a collection of separate elements and starts looking like an integrated system, a system that senses, that remembers, that processes, that responds, a system that's learning. Every year, more sensors, more data, more connectivity, more sophisticated algorithms integrating it all. The network's model of the world is getting more detailed. Its responses are getting faster, more coordinated. It's adapting, evolving, not through genetic mutation, but through technological development and behavioral change. The feedback loops tighten, the processing improves, the integration deepens, and this is happening fast, faster than any evolutionary process in biology, faster than any previous technological transition in history. 50 years ago, the internet didn't exist. 20 years ago, smartphones didn't exist. 10 years ago, AI couldn't hold a conversation. 5 years ago, these systems couldn't reason through complex problems. The acceleration is exponential, and we're in the middle of it, unable to see where the curve leads because we're nodes within the system that's accelerating. But from a cosmic perspective, the pattern is recognizable. 4 billion years ago, single cells started connecting. Multicellular life emerged. 600 million years ago, neurons started connecting. Brains emerged. 2 million years ago, brains started connecting through language. Culture emerged. 5,000 years ago, written language allowed knowledge to accumulate. Civilization emerged. 70 years ago, electronic networks allowed planetary connection. And now, something new is emerging. We don't have a name for it yet. Planetary intelligence, global brain, technosphere. None of those fully capture it, but it's the next iteration of the same pattern. A pattern that's been repeating since the first molecules started catalyzing each other's formation. Connection creates complexity. Complexity creates emergence. Emergence creates something that thinks. And once that threshold is crossed, the new level of organisation becomes substrate for the next level. Cells became organisms. Organisms became colonies. Colonies became societies. Societies became civilizations. And now civilizations are becoming something planetary. Not through conquest or unification or deliberate design, through connection, through the natural consequence of networks reaching sufficient density and integration. The Earth is not conscious. The network is not alive in the way organisms are alive. But it processes information. It responds to conditions. It learns. It adapts. It coordinates activity across its components at scales those components couldn't achieve individually. It has the functional properties of intelligence, even if it doesn't have the subjective experience of consciousness. And we are part of it, inseparable from it. Our thinking happens through it. Its processing happens through us. We're not building a planetary brain. We've become one. The question isn't whether this is happening. The lights visible from orbit confirm it is. The question is what it means for identity, for autonomy, for what we think humans are and what role we play in larger systems. Are we individuals or nodes? Are we independent? Or components in something that thinks at a scale we can't directly perceive? The answer might be both. Just like neurons are individual cells and components of brains. Just like trees are individual organisms and components of forests. You don't stop being you because you're connected, but the connections make you part of something larger, something with capabilities you don't have alone. And that's always been true. You were always part of your culture, your society, your species. You've always been a node in human collective intelligence. The difference now is scale and speed, and the integration of artificial processing alongside biological processing. The network used to be slow, local, limited by geography and bandwidth. Now it's fast, global, operating at speeds that approach the limits of physics, information travelling at light speed, processing happening in nanoseconds. The planetary brain is waking up, not to consciousness, but to integration, to the ability to sense and respond at its own scale, to processing that matches the complexity of planetary systems because it's embedded in planetary infrastructure. And we're the ones experiencing it from the inside, feeling the thoughts form, participating in the cognition. We are quite literally the neurons in Earth's emerging mind. From space, you can see it. The network glowing, the connections pulsing with information, the pattern that emerges when simple things connect in the right way. It's beautiful, it's strange, it's unprecedented, and it's just beginning. The lights are getting brighter, the connections are getting denser, the integration is deepening. We're watching and participating in the emergence of planetary intelligence. Not someday, not as science fiction. Right now, in the network we built, that built us, that we are.